For a year, the town of Redemption Creek only saw Matilda as a shadow in a black dress, a widow mourning the family she lost to the red dust. They saw a woman broken by grief. They should have looked closer. Grief, when it simmers for that long, doesn't just fade, it sharpens into a weapon. And her day of judgment was finally dawning. The people of Redemption Creek had grown used to seeing her. Every morning she walked from her small boarding house room to the general store. Every afternoon she sat on the same bench outside the church. Every evening she returned to her room before the sun touched the horizon, always in the same black dress, always with the same empty look in her eyes. The townspeople whispered about poor Matilda, the woman who lost everything in that terrible stampede a year ago. But Matilda wasn't just sitting on that bench. She was watching, she was listening, and she was planning. A year earlier, life had been different. Matilda had lived on a small ranch 5 miles outside town with her husband Thomas and their 10-year-old son Leo. Their land wasn't much to look at, just 40 acres of scrubland, but it had something precious in this dry country. It had water. A creek ran right through their property, fed by an underground spring that never ran dry, not even in the worst droughts. That water caught the attention of Bartholomew Thorne. Everyone just called him Bart. He owned the biggest cattle operation in 3 counties, with thousands of head grazing on land that stretched as far as the eye could see. But his empire had a weakness. Most of his grazing land was dry. He needed that creek to keep his cattle alive during the harsh summer months. Bart tried to buy the land from Thomas fair and square at first. He offered a decent price. Then he offered double, then triple. But Thomas wouldn't sell. That land was his family's future. He planned to pass it on to Leo someday. The creek meant they would always have security in this hard country. Bart Thorne wasn't a man who took no for an answer. He had built his empire by taking what he wanted, one way or another. If he couldn't buy the land, he would find another way to get it. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in September. Thomas and Leo had ridden out early to check on their small herd of cattle. They were moving them to fresh grazing near the eastern boundary of their property. That's when they heard the thunder. It wasn't storm thunder, it was the sound of 2,000 cattle running at full speed. Bart's herd had supposedly broken through a fence during the night. His cowboys claimed they were trying to round them up when something spooked the animals. Maybe it was a mountain lion, maybe it was a rattlesnake. Nobody could say for sure. All anyone knew was that the massive herd came charging straight toward the spot where Thomas and Leo were working. Thomas saw them coming. He grabbed Leo and tried to get him to safety. They ran for a cluster of rocks that might offer protection. They almost made it. The herd swept over them like a brown wave of hooves and dust. When the cowboys finally got the cattle under control and the dust settled, they found the bodies. Thomas had tried to shield his son with his own body. It hadn't been enough. The sheriff investigated, of course. Sheriff Wade was a careful man who always seemed to find exactly what Bart Thorne wanted him to find. He ruled it a tragic accident. These things happened in cattle country. Nobody was to blame, just bad luck. 3 days after the funeral, Bart Thorne came to see Matilda. He took off his hat and told her how sorry he was for her loss. He said he felt responsible, even though it wasn't really his fault. He wanted to help. He offered to buy her land so she wouldn't have to worry about running a ranch alone. The price he offered was less than a quarter of what he had offered Thomas. Matilda sold it to him. What choice did she have? A woman alone couldn't run a ranch. She took his money and moved into town. She bought a black dress and started her mourning. But mourning wasn't all she was doing. From her bench outside the church, Matilda could see everything that happened in Redemption Creek. She saw Bart's men come into town every Saturday to drink and play cards. She noticed that Jake, Bart's foreman, always got drunk and talked too much. She heard him bragging one night about how they had used gunshots to spook that herd, how perfectly they had timed it. She saw the sheriff taking his weekly envelope from Bart's office. She watched the judge do the same. She understood now that the law in Redemption Creek belonged to whoever had the most money. Matilda realized that conventional justice would never come. If she wanted justice, she would have to create it herself. But she was one woman against an empire. She couldn't fight Bart with guns or fists. She would have to be smarter than that. She started paying attention to Bart's business. She learned that he was planning the biggest cattle drive of his career. He was going to move 3,000 head to the railroad depot in Abilene. This single drive would make him richer than ever. He had borrowed heavily to buy more cattle, betting everything on this one massive payday. The herd would have to pass through Devil's Gate, a narrow canyon 20 miles north of town. It was the only way to get that many cattle through the Badlands. The canyon walls rose 200 feet on either side, and the passage at its narrowest point was barely 50 feet wide. Matilda started taking walks, long walks. People assumed she was wandering in her grief. Actually, she was scouting. She found a trail that led to the top of the canyon walls. She discovered a ledge covered with loose rocks, positioned perfectly above the narrowest part of the passage. She began her preparations carefully. She couldn't buy supplies in Redemption Creek without raising questions, so she took the stagecoach to the next town over, supposedly to visit a cousin. There she bought things a widow might need: rope to secure belongings, tools to fix up a new place, a sturdy mule to carry supplies. Nobody asked questions. Nobody suspected anything. For 3 months she worked in secret. She would leave town before dawn, telling her landlady she couldn't sleep and needed to walk. She would lead her mule up to Devil's Gate and spend the morning hauling rocks into position on that ledge. She built a careful pile, balanced just right. One good push would send tons of stone crashing down into the canyon. She studied the canyon carefully. She didn't want to hurt the cattle. They were innocent creatures. She just needed to scare them, to send them running in every direction across the Badlands where they would scatter for miles. Without those cattle, Bart would be ruined. She also gathered wood and dry brush, placing them at strategic points along the canyon rim. Fire and smoke would add to the panic, making it impossible for Bart's cowboys to control the herd. Spring arrived, and with it came the time for the great drive. Bart had hired extra men for the job. 30 cowboys would move those 3,000 cattle to Abilene. It would take them 2 weeks if everything went perfectly. They would pass through Devil's Gate on the second day. The night before the drive began, Matilda didn't sleep. She packed her few belongings and left a note for her landlady saying she was leaving town to start a new life. She took off her black dress for the last time and put on clothes she had bought in secret. They were men's work clothes that had belonged to someone about Thomas's size. They were practical clothes in brown and tan, clothes that would blend into the landscape. She was at Devil's Gate before the sun came up. She checked her preparations one last time. The rocks were ready. The wood was in place. All she needed now was the right moment. She heard them coming before she saw them. 3,000 cattle make a lot of noise. The ground itself seemed to shake with their approach. Dust rose in a great cloud that could be seen for miles. Matilda watched from her hiding spot as the first cattle entered the canyon. Bart was riding near the front, his silver saddle catching the morning sun. Jake the foreman was with him, along with their best men. They were confident. They had done this before. Devil's Gate was routine for them. She waited until the herd was fully committed to the canyon. There was no turning back now. The lead cattle were almost through the narrowest part, with the bulk of the herd pressed tight between those high stone walls. That's when Matilda acted. She pushed the first pile of rocks. They tumbled down the cliff face with a roar that echoed through the canyon. Tons of stone crashed onto the canyon floor right in the middle of the herd. The cattle panicked instantly. The ones in front tried to run forward. The ones in back tried to turn around. The ones in the middle had nowhere to go but sideways, climbing over each other in their terror. Matilda lit her fires. Smoke billowed down into the canyon, adding to the chaos. The cowboys shouted and waved their ropes, but it was useless. 3,000 terrified cattle were beyond anyone's control. Some cattle charged forward through the gap and kept running into the Badlands. Others turned back and stampeded through the cowboys trying to contain them. Within minutes, the organized herd had become a chaos of animals running in every direction. Bart screamed orders that nobody could hear over the noise. His horse reared and bucked, as frightened as the cattle. Jake tried to rally the men, but they were too busy trying not to get trampled. The disaster was complete in less than an hour. The cattle were scattered across 20 miles of rough country. Some had fallen into ravines. Others were still running toward the horizon. The carefully organized drive had become an impossible mess. It would take weeks to round up even half of those cattle. By then, Bart would miss his deadline in Abilene. The buyers would find other suppliers. The loans he had taken would come due with no money to pay them. Matilda watched from the canyon rim as Bart realized what had happened. She saw the moment when he understood that he was ruined. His empire, built on theft and murder, had crumbled in a single morning. She climbed down from her perch and retrieved the horse she had hidden nearby. It was one of Thomas's old horses that she had secretly bought back from the man Bart had sold it to. She rode down to the road where Bart sat on his exhausted horse, staring at his scattered fortune. He looked up as she approached. For a moment, he didn't recognize her without the black dress. Then his eyes widened. "You," he whispered. "Me," Matilda said simply. "The rocks, the fire, it was all you?" "Every bit of it." Bart's hand moved toward his gun, but Matilda shook her head. "Your men are scattered across the Badlands, trying to save what's left of your herd. The ones who aren't have already figured out that you can't pay them anymore. You're alone, Bart." It was true. The cowboys who weren't chasing cattle were already riding toward town. When a boss couldn't pay, cowboys didn't stick around. "You destroyed me," Bart said. His voice was hollow, defeated. "No," Matilda replied. "You destroyed yourself the day you decided my family's lives were worth less than a piece of land. You took everything from me for water rights. Now the land has taken everything from you. What am I supposed to do now?" "That's not my problem. Maybe you'll find honest work. Maybe you'll drift to another town and try to start over. Maybe you'll drink yourself to death in some saloon. I don't really care." She turned her horse toward the road. Then she looked back one more time. "Oh, and Bart, your tame sheriff won't help you. Without your money, he's just another lawman who needs to keep the town happy. And the town remembers what you did to Thomas and Leo. They just weren't brave enough to say anything while you had power." She was right about that too. When Bart finally made it back to town, he found the sheriff very interested in investigating some old complaints about his business practices. The judge suddenly remembered that there were laws about water rights and property theft. The banker wanted immediate payment on those loans. Within a week, Bart Thorne was gone from Redemption Creek. Some said he headed east. Others said he went south to Mexico. Nobody really cared enough to find out for sure. Matilda didn't stay to watch his final humiliation. She rode out of town that very day, leaving the black dress hanging in her old room with a note that said simply, "I'm done mourning." The landlady found something else with the dress. It was most of the money Bart had paid for the land, minus what Matilda had spent on her supplies. The note with it said to distribute it among the families that Bart had cheated over the years. People saw Matilda one last time, riding east toward the sunrise. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She wore practical traveling clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. She had a bedroll tied behind her saddle and saddlebags packed with supplies. She looked like someone heading toward a new life, not running from an old one. The people of Redemption Creek talked about her for years afterward. Some called her a hero. Others said she was just as ruthless as Bart had been. But they all agreed on one thing. She had shown them that justice didn't always come from judges and sheriffs. Sometimes it came from ordinary people who refused to accept injustice. They also agreed on something else. It was probably good that she left town. A woman capable of bringing down Bart Thorne's empire with nothing but patience and clever planning was not someone you wanted to cross. The story of Matilda became a legend in that part of the country. Cowboys told it around campfires. Mothers whispered it to daughters who needed to be brave. It changed a little with each telling, growing larger and more dramatic. But the core of the story always remained the same. A woman in a black dress had lost everything. Instead of accepting her fate, she had planned and waited and struck when the moment was right. She had brought down a powerful man, using his own greed against him. Some stories teach us about heroes with guns and badges, but Matilda's story teaches us something different. It shows that the quietest people sometimes have the strongest will. It proves that patience can be more powerful than violence. It reminds us that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come to those who refuse to give up. The black dress still hangs in the Redemption Creek Museum, donated by the landlady who saved it all those years ago. Visitors look at it and wonder about the woman who wore it. They imagine her sitting on that bench, watching and planning while the world dismissed her as a helpless widow. But the dress tells only half the story. The real tale of Matilda isn't about mourning. It's about what comes after. It's about choosing to act when everyone expects you to do nothing. It's about finding your own justice when the system fails you. That's the lesson of the woman who wore black every day until the day she brought justice in red dust. She showed that anyone, no matter how powerless they seem, can change everything if they're smart enough and brave enough to try. What did you think of Matilda's brand of justice? Was she right to take matters into her own hands? Or should she have found another way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption from frontier days. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.